Before we begin, welcome back to the show. Now, I'm on a mission to spread these conversations to as many people as I can. If you could do me the small favor of clicking the follow button on Spotify or clicking subscribe on YouTube, it does make a massive difference in helping me bring on bigger guests who provide even more value. So thank you and enjoy the episode. Jessica, Ella, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. Round two.
Round two. If we had a terms and conditions for being human, suffering would be the first condition. Pain is clearly the gateway to growth, but why do some people get stuck with their story and why does it become others' success story?
Oh, that's such a good question. I honestly feel like, and this is not really helpful to anybody, but I honestly feel like some people are born with this, I'm not going to let this thing beat me. I'm just not going to let it beat me. I'm not going to let it. And they've just got this eternal hope and this eternal, like, no matter how dark it gets, there's this thing that just clicks over. And I've always had this in my brain that's just like, no, just one more day, one more trauma, one more memory, one more processing, and then we'll be better. And some people don't have that. Some people aren't born with that. And I look at the way that I was raised and the things that have happened to me and the things that have happened to other people. And sometimes it's not even that anything worse has happened, but they just don't have that mindset or that it's almost like a character trait that I believe that we're almost inherited. But I actually almost sometimes feel like the more trauma that you have, the more strength you have because you learn how to survive. So you just start to, that's how you function. You just function in survival to like, let's just get through. Whereas for somebody who maybe has had like an ideal childhood, but then goes through something at a later time, they're not in that survival mode. They haven't built a character around survival. So they don't necessarily have the skills and the tools to deal with this big thing that's happened. So sometimes it's almost like a blessing because it gives you this like resilience and strength, and it's also then a little bit of a curse later on in life because you have to unlearn survival and learn how to actually live, which is like literally the hardest thing. But yeah, I feel like it's a character trait. I almost feel like it's something that people are born with.
There's a lot of people who deny their own experiences because they haven't had, I guess you call it T1 trauma in their life. And now there's new research emerging to prove the genetic component, like trauma can be passed down through DNA. So how are people who might not be able to consciously identify these big pivotal experiences, how can they think about trauma in their own life from maybe a different perspective, from a genetic perspective or from these series of micro influences?
Yeah, I think what we don't realize is that trauma and pain is passed down, not just like it's passed down genetically for survival. So we've got, you learn like that a stove is hot. You touch it, you burn yourself. You learn that it's hot. Like there's things that we learn from our parents, and in the same way that we learn those things from our parents or from our experiences, we also learn that if we do X, Y, Z, we're going to be yelled at, we're going to be screamed at. We learn those things through the act of our parents treating us the way that probably their parents treated them. But I think that a lot of people think that trauma is, like you said, this one big experience, this one big event. And so they don't identify with having trauma. And so they don't ever do the work, quote unquote. They don't ever actually get into that way because they're like, I'm fine. Like there's nothing really big happened to me. But actually lots of those sort of micro traumas, which can be someone not being there for you. It can be being yelled at, or it could be being raised. It could be parents divorcing. It could be, there's so many different versions of bullying. It could be a number of different things. Basically, to me, a trauma is an unprocessed memory. So if you're still holding on to it and you're still thinking about it, it's a trauma. If it's coming up in your daily life, if you're being triggered by it, it's a trauma because it's an unprocessed memory. It's something that's like from the past is still, the pattern is playing and the emotions are still coming forth. That's a trauma to me. So people think that, because it's lots of little things, that's how, and they say, that's how my parents were raised and their parents raised them and my grandparents raised them like that. That's just how it's always been. Actually, that accumulation makes it worse because if you have, say, a mother who was abused by her mother and she was a really stressed out person. And when she was growing you in her tummy, she was developing your nervous system to pair with her nervous system. So if she's anxious and stressed and she's got no window of tolerance and her nervous system is dysregulated, that baby's going to come out with a dysregulated nervous system to pair with the mum. So you're born with already a very small window of tolerance, which basically is your ability to handle the stresses of everyday life. You're a baby that screams at everything, which makes your mum even more stressed, which makes her lose her mind, which makes you more stressed as a child. And that doesn't sound like trauma, quote unquote, the way that we would think about trauma and abuse, etc. But that sets you up from birth in a pretty bad place. So you think about that child then going through life, they don't have this ability to handle the stresses of everyday life. So the micro things become big to them, and they carry them and they store them and they build up, and they're not processing anything. And all of a sudden they've got triggers around everything. Like, people are triggers. Certain words that people say are triggers. Places are triggers. Certain foods, smells, because everything in their environment is a threat. All of a sudden they're living completely in survival mode, but they don't even know that that's what they're doing because it just feels normal to them. So it's really hard to identify until somebody says to you, the thing that I say to people is, if you're not happy and you're not feeling alive and enjoying life, then you've probably got something to work on. You've probably got some trauma there that you need to heal, because everybody does. As you said at the start, pain and suffering is part of the human experience, but what you do with it and how you process it is what matters.
How would you frame healing? Because I feel like healing's framed as returning to point zero, but as we're learning, we're actually inheriting a lot of trauma. So if we removed all of the trauma, or we processed it, overcame it, and we return to that point zero, it's actually still a baseline of suffering from what we've inherited. So how can someone frame their own healing?
Yeah, I think people have unrealistic expectations around what healed looks like and around what healing looks like. I have clients time and time again that are like, I've done all this work and I'm still not feeling good. And I'm like, oh, what's been happening in your life? Oh, I got fired from my job and my partner left me. Okay, well, that's not your trauma resurfacing. That's just life being shit. And there's pain there to be felt. And that's a shitty situation that you're going to need to feel and experience and move through. I think that for me, healing is your ability to handle the dark and the light, your ability to handle life as it comes at you. It's the resilience. It's and the acceptance of okay, this really shitty thing's just happened and it's painful, and I'm going to feel that, and I'm going to know how to feel that. I'm not going to push it down and go, no, we don't want to feel that grief. We don't want to feel that pain. We're just going to go and get busy at work and avoid it. To me, healing is, it doesn't mean that nothing comes up. It means that when it comes up, you're comfortable with it, you sit with it, you move through it, and then you come out the other side and you feel, alive, free, happy, calm, powerful, loving, all the things. You feel, to me, it's aliveness. And there are those moments where you don't feel that, or you do feel that, but in a negative way, because you're so alive, but you're feeling pain. And that is part of the human experience. When we feel nothing, most of the time we're completely dissociated. And when you're dissociated, you're disconnected from your body, and you're basically just kind of, from in a woo-woo ways, floating around in consciousness, and you're not really having a human experience. You're just I want to be up there in the clouds. I don't want to be here. But healing to me is being in your body with the full spectrum of emotions and feeling comfortable with that. And that's everybody's difficulty. It's not what happened. It's not the flashbacks. It's not the visuals. It's not even the thoughts. It's the feeling that comes from the thoughts. It's the feeling that comes with the flashback. It's the feeling that comes with the heartbreak. It's all about feeling.
So do a lot of people try and graduate this school of healing to almost bypass these normal human experiences?
100%.
And it's all with the motive to escape the feeling.
100, this was me. I was this was me. And so many women that I've worked with is let's process the trauma, shift the negative beliefs so that we can just live this beautiful existence but not have to actually feel any of that anymore. We use our intellectual mind to be everything's good. Let's bypass it. Let's hack it. Let's mindset hacks, all of that. Let's just try and live up here in our mind which is also a form of control. if you don't feel safe, which is probably you're pushing down some panic and some fear, you're just going to keep control of everything in your mind. So a lot of people do enter the healing world. There's two different paths. People enter and they go mind, and they go subconscious and beliefs, and they intellectualize everything, and they try and figure out their traumas, and they heal to get to the point where they think, okay, that's done and I don't have to do anything else. Or they go down this other path where they just feel, and there is flaws in just feeling as well. Like I know people who have never done any work with their mind, and they go to breath work religiously, and they're like crying and screaming, and they're like emoting, and they become addicted to emoting, and they go to a breath work and they're like, oh, I didn't really like scream or cry, so I didn't have a successful breath work. They become addicted to actually feeling their feelings. Those people often will leave breath work and a week later be thinking, I'm a piece of shit, I hate myself, what's wrong with me? And they have all these negative thoughts, which builds up the emotions again. So they go back to breath work and breathe it out. But that's just a funneling of the emotion. It's not actually fixing where it's coming from in their brain. The memories are still unprocessed. The thoughts are still coming from the beliefs. So there's like people often do choose like one or the other path, and some people overlap, and in my opinion they're the people that do really well because they're coming at it from, you know, all four angles. But yeah, people generally kind of split into those categories.
So maybe explain that, how a belief can lead to the accumulation of almost this reservoir of feelings that forces people to need that release.
Yeah. Well, a belief, like to me, a subconscious belief comes from a moment. Like we create beliefs in moments where we learn X, Y, Z. Like if I do this, this means this. This child said that I'm ugly, therefore I must be ugly. The trauma is the moment when somebody said that to you and the feeling was like, oh, like your heart sank, you felt sad, you felt rejected. Those feelings get pushed down and they get bundled together with these words of I'm ugly. And then what happens is every time you feel that way, every time once you start to have a subconscious belief, that's your brain takes what you believe to be true and makes that your reality. So you look in the mirror and you go, oh, I look ugly today. And when you think those thoughts, it's pulling back on the original belief and it's bringing up those feelings of sadness and rejection, because that's the way that it works. The memory holds the subconscious belief and the belief creates the thoughts. And it creates the thoughts so that the thoughts just keep validating the belief over and over to strengthen it, because your mind wants to believe that it's true because it thinks that it needs to believe that in order to keep you safe from thinking that you're beautiful and then or someone telling you you're ugly again and getting that shock and rejection feeling. So it's like, if I say that I'm ugly and feel that I'm ugly over and over, I'll be safe, I'll be protected. And so every time you think the thought, it generates the feeling, because the feeling that was never properly felt. It was never expressed. No one ever came along and said, actually, honey, you're beautiful. You're, you know, there's nothing wrong with you. That kid's an asshole. No one's ever actually explained it to them in a way that their brain can understand, and then they can get a hug and love and let those feelings go. So they just experience it over and over. And in my opinion, the more that we have those thoughts that bring up the feelings that we push down, that we don't want to feel, the feeling, we keep pushing it down and it gets bigger and bigger. And that's when people get to those breaking points. And I see women all the time that are like, you know, just hit my late 20s or my 30s and all of a sudden I had anxiety and I've never had that before. And it's like you just coped really well, but it got so big that, and you know, if you think about it from physiology, like if we are thinking these negative thoughts, our body is like creating that chemistry. It's causing anxiety, which is, you know, increasing cortisol, which is increasing the inflammation. And we start to then bloat and we look worse and then we feel ugly. And it's like we start to like physically represent those beliefs as well. So we start to then also feel uncomfortable in our bodies. And yeah, it's just this vicious circle. It literally affects every area of life.
How would you discern between being able to feel these normal human experiences and then what is worth peeling back the layers and figuring out what subconscious beliefs are actually driving these experiences that might not need to be had in the first place?
I think that there's a kind of reaction that is normal, and it's hard to sometimes know what that reaction is when you're in it. But for instance, you know, having a parent pass away or something, we know that that's going to be painful. We know that there's going to be a period where we need to sit in that grief. We know that there's like certain things that are naturally going to affect us as a human. But then there's like an argument with your partner where they say something and your reaction is hysterical and you cut them off and you walk out and you ghost them or you give them the silent treatment and you feel this rage in your body, and the reaction to what's happening doesn't really match with the situation. Like,
disproportionate.
It's disproportionate and it's almost this hysterical reaction. And I normally say to people, if there is this hysterical reaction, if it's there's a saying and it's not mine, but if it's hysterical, it's historical.
That's good.
And so you know that if that reaction is not matched with the situation, which again is really difficult to discern in the moment because you're hysterical, so you don't know.
What's the metric for this then? Because it's quite subjective to what would constitute disproportionate as well. Like what is the reference point here?
The way that I think about it is afterwards, if you look back and think, what was that? It's historical. Because if you can come out of it and then realize that the way that you were acting was like probably not valid for that situation, once you've calmed down, you know that, okay, there's something in that for me to go deeper into. But it is that like it's a fine balance, because you can become addicted to healing. You can become addicted to having an emotion and going, ooh, what's this trauma? What's that belief? What was I just thinking? What triggered me? And like I have done this. You can do your own head in trying to figure everything out. And the way that I basically describe it to people is like, if you have done a lot of work, you need to take a break from the work. And if you have an emotion that's sticking around for more than like 4 or 5 days, there's something to look at. You can have off days, right? You can be off for a couple of days and then you kind of come back. But if you're 4 or 5 days a week of just deep sadness or anxiety, panic, rage, guilt, whatever it is, and you can't shake it, it's something that, and I believe that like our bodies are wanting us to heal. They're wanting us to, express. And so it's showing you that there's something there that wants to come out. That's when I would book into a session, or I would go and self-inquire and be like, where's this coming from? Was there a trigger? Or is it something old? Like often for me, there can be like trauma memories or trauma anniversaries, which is a really common thing as well, where it's actually something that happened at the exact same time 5 years ago that my body is almost like remembering without my brain consciously knowing what it is, which is a whole other subject. But I think that if you're stuck in something for a period of time, that's when you look at it. And it's hard again, because when you're in it, and some people get stuck in it and they want to wallow in it, and they get so low that they don't want to look for help, which can be a really difficult balance to find. But yeah, generally it's like if it's there for longer than 4 or 5 days or a week, it's something that you want to look at. But again, that's relative to what's happening. I wouldn't expect somebody who's had a loved one to pass to be over that in a week. So it is relative to if you're living your life and you're like, why am I so sad? Like nothing has happened. Where is this coming from? Why am I just carrying, or why am I panicked every day for no reason at the moment? That's something to look into. When there's something happening, that obviously is different.
Because I find there's this tension inside myself around when you're so self-aware, you realize that every emotion, every thought can have an origin. There's like this obsession to want to figure out where it's coming from, right? From a place of control. And then it's like, okay, well, I have to let go. But like, okay, now I'm telling myself I have to let go. And it's just this metacognition and this, it's just this inability to be human. I think there's this obsession to be one-sided and have a one-sided experience of life, because I guess the undercurrent is fear. Maybe we don't have trust in our nervous system to handle the stresses. So we're constantly trying to manipulate the circumstances in our life to be in control.
Absolutely.
Which not only limits us, but it's draining. And as you said, what's the metric that we can quantify our life to? I think maybe we don't have a goal. It's really hard to quantify what we're trying to optimize here for.
Yeah, and that's where it comes back to. I think the whole point of being human and being alive is to be alive. Which is like sounds so simple and so boring, but at the end, all of the accomplishments don't matter, right? Like it's the experiences, it's the moments with people, it's connection. Like that's what it comes to at the end. And so, no one's laying there going like, I had this car or whatever. Like they're thinking about the people, they're thinking about the connections. And so I think like, of course, we're going to experience a full spectrum of emotions when it comes to those connections, because all trauma is relational, really. I can't think of any traumas that don't involve other people. Like, I think even like a car accident, like someone else was driving the other car, there's going to be some anger or resentment towards that person if they've killed someone that you love, or if they've injured you and it's affected your life. Like, all trauma is happening with other people. So our biggest struggle in life is dealing with people, really. And that's like true in any world, physical or online. And so it's learning to just to embrace that almost, and to just be like, this is shit, and that hurt, but that feels good. And then that hurt and this feels good. And understanding that like it's all a part of it. And I think as humans, we're designed to like run away from suffering, to avoid suffering. And it's for our own protection. But what we've decided is safe and unsafe is getting pretty skewed. You know, if you go back, what was unsafe was predators out in the wild. Now what feels unsafe is work and comments online and negative comments from people you love, or saying no to an event, or like there's like so many things that feel like threats that we've like built up in our systems over time. I actually feel like our prehistoric brains are not equipped for the life that we're currently living, which is probably what's causing a lot of people suffering. But I think that like that it's to experience it all. It's to be able to experience it all. And when we go into, and the mind, as you said before, like the mind can be untrustworthy. Like the mind can trick you. The mind can tell you that like we're doing really good, but it's actually pushing something down over here. And, you know, you can have thoughts and then think that those thoughts mean something about you. And your mind can take you on all of these different.
How would you delineate the thoughts that we have? Like what are some of the internal signals where someone would be avoiding some of the work, but they might not be aware of it? Like, what are some of the little internal signals that we might be missing?
I think like for a lot of people that are stuck in their head, that don't realize that they're stuck in their head, it's physical pain in their body, because they're ignoring their body completely by living in their head, and they will come with a lot of pain. Like I always find those people that are overthinkers, I'm like, how's your body? And they're like, oh, and they don't really notice. And they're like, oh, actually I've had back pain for like 2 years. I've had neck pain, get migraines. Like their body is
expressing what the mind's suppressing.
Yeah. So their mind kind of distracts them from actually having to feel, which comes back to that whole thing of like, if we weren't so afraid of feelings, and we were actually comfortable to sit with feelings and to notice feelings, and to sometimes not identify the thoughts with the feelings and just have the feeling, we'd actually be able to move through it so much easier, like through life so much easier. But without that pain, there is no joy. Like everything is in contrast.
But this is what I'm trying to the bow I'm trying to thread here is around like recreating the familiar hell, and then convincing ourselves that it's a necessary part of our existence because I just have to feel it. I just have to process it.
Yeah.
And being able to become aware between what is worth suffering for, what is just the past replicating itself and it feels comfortable. And then I've convinced myself that I should be in this and this is necessary.
Well, I don't even know if there's a convincing of self or if there's a conscious recreating of hell. It's very unconscious. Like you don't know that you're recreating your hell. And even when you become aware that you're recreating your hell and that you've been doing this to yourself, not necessarily, but through kind of the actions that you've taken, the thoughts that you've had that have led you down certain paths, you've ended up in, you know, the same situations over and over. When you're in that, you don't know that you're in that. Like I've been doing this for 15 years and I can still get myself into situations where I'm like, shit, I didn't even see that I was doing that, because it just takes over because it's unconscious.
So then how do we become aware of what is unconscious in the moment?
It's almost impossible to become aware of something that you are completely unconsciously aware of. Like it's getting to that point of, I think a lot of people get to that breaking point and then they go, oh, this is what I've been doing. And they realize and they have those aha moments and they change it at that point. And the path that they're taking next might be a little bit different, but it's not something that they're intentionally doing.
something I was thinking about before when we were talking about the internal signals is like presence. Like I often find that when I'm not present, like that is almost the past taking, or like there's almost an undercurrent of fear.
Absolutely.
If I'm in two ways though, there's like the association with the nightmare in the future, but then also sometimes we create this fantasy as well to escape the fear as well. So like we create, this is where negative thinking is overlooked, but how many people fall into like money scams because they're struggling with money and they've given this lucrative offer and they don't have the negative thinking to be cynical about a situation. So they associate with the fantasy of, you know, this is going to solve all my problems in my life. And we don't have both the yin and the yang, the positive and the negative. We haven't integrated it. And either we associate with this fantasy to run away. Like this is what happens when we get love bombed in relationships, right? And it's like, oh my God, the perfect partner to compensate for the absence of that in past relationships. Or we associate with the nightmare as well because we start fearing that everything's going to go terribly wrong.
I feel like we know though, like even with the love bombing, like there's a familiarity, like there's an excitement, but there's a familiarity with past experiences. So it's like this feels exciting, but this feels right. And that part of our brain that's like, this feels right. Like I'm excited. This person feels like the right person. They feel like that because they're familiar, because they are similar to somebody in the past. And so again, it's like they're not consciously aware of that's happening, and it's not even the fantasy that they're getting swept up in, it's the familiarity. And I think that probably even with the money example, like people, maybe they watched their parents take risks and lose it all, and you know what I mean? And so it's like, oh, maybe that will work for me, or they're trying to, you know, close off these patterns and these loops from the past. But yeah, I think it's such a hard one because you're right with presence absolutely can anchor you. It depends how much trauma you've had as well as to how present you can be and how frequently you can be present. Because I know people who are present for mere seconds before they dissociate again, and they don't even necessarily recognize that they're doing it, or they don't recognize that they've ticked over into fight or flight and that they're rushing until they have a moment or a breakdown and they go, oh, okay, I've spent 6 months and I've hit burnout. And then they can come back and be present again. But all of a sudden they find themselves rushing and they find themselves back in that same situation. So it's like, it's one of those things that you have to be so self-aware, but you can't be too self-aware, because if you're too self-aware, you're dissecting everything and probably putting yourself into fight or flight by over-analyzing. So it's a really hard balance, but presence is absolutely presence, slowness, connection, all of those things, I believe what sort of anchors us back in.
Do you think we should be training like with meditation and breath work to ground us in presence, or is the default, because I've read a lot about how, you know, the default state is presence, but, you know, our nervous system, our subconscious beliefs, like it's taking us away from being present, but it's very difficult to strip away all of our trauma as such and return to presence. But there's also so much research emerging about the benefits of meditation, breath work, on retraining our brain, especially with how like the plasticity of our circuitry to change the way that we can be focused and maintain presence as well. So like, I feel like there's the 2-part process of you can remove the beliefs, but also train yourself as well. It's
making sure that we're looking at all of those pillars, because I've done neurofeedback, or a type of neurofeedback where there's like, he attaches little electrical currents and like changes the frequency of like whatever he's moving parts that are like too overactive, slowing them down, changing that. He can also put one on your vagus nerve to help stimulate your vagus nerve. And what I find is that the brain can slow down, and we can, we can regulate ourselves, or even beyond sort of regulation, we can work with the brain to tell the brain that it's safe. But at the end of the day, if the body doesn't feel safe, or if you have past trauma that you haven't worked on, no matter how much, neurotherapy or neurofeedback that you do, you're going to unconsciously put yourself, and your body's going to put itself back into fight or flight, because the issue with most people with trauma is that presence doesn't feel safe. because being present means that I'm not alert and I'm not ready for the next threat. And if you're someone like me who's had trauma after trauma after trauma every year of your life, it gets to the point where you're like, if I feel calm and relaxed, it comes with this big wave of panic of, oh shit, what's coming? I need to be aware. And then they put themselves back into fight or flight so that they're ready to go. And it's not even sometimes because there's a memory or anything there, but it's because they feel on this unconscious level that if they're not activated, they're not safe. So we're putting ourselves into fight or flight to protect ourselves from probably a threat that is long gone and from a body that just only knows how to operate that way. So presence feels unsafe. Presence causes panic, which is why there's a lot of people that say, there's a lot of books that say you shouldn't get traumatized people to do meditation because it can activate panic. It can activate panic attacks. And that's why, because coming into that feels unguarded and unprotected. And so then you find yourself in this situation
that's
where
what's right. Everything's right and nothing's right at the same time in this space. So how would someone discern with their own trauma? Like some people might not have these big tangible moments of trauma, right? But they're feeling this general level of anxiety. It's pretty common in our society. So how would you get them to think about what is probably a useful modality for them? Like how is someone going to understand what is probably the best domino to help
them to uncover where it's coming from?
I feel like with most people's lives there's sort of a big domino, whether someone's more mind heavy and they live in their mind and they might be benefiting from some of the breath work meditation. Maybe they can trust themselves to be present in that. Or some people might have these big tangible moments of trauma that a certain modality might be a more useful modality to start with.
I think that the baseline is creating safety in the nervous system first, because you have to be, even if you create that safety in the nervous system and you get that window of tolerance, stronger, and that ability for them to not kind of tick over into fight or flight all the time, they're going to have a baseline to work with. And yes, they're going to feel panicked and they're going to feel uneasy if they've had a lot of trauma, but that's going to allow them to uncover whatever it is that's causing the panic. So for me, it's always like create safety first. So the best way to create safety is within the nervous system. Then we create safety in the mind. So looking at the beliefs of I'm not safe. Like anxiety is always coming from I'm not safe, whether it's financially, physically, in love, in whatever area of life, it always comes back to safety. So you create that capacity first, that safety in the body for you to actually be able to feel everything. And then you can start working with the mind and body together. And this is why I work with people across those 4 pillars. Like I work with them energetically, I work with them somatically, I work with their subconscious and with their memories at the same time, because you need to move through all of those pillars. Like you need to actually be able to go, okay, they can't get out of fight or flight right now. Like we cannot get them to regulate their nervous system because every time they regulate, they're having a panic attack. So we need to allow them to have the panic attack, and we need to understand what's coming up in their mind when they're having the panic attack, what's causing it, what's triggering it. Oh, it's this memory. Let's process that memory. Let's work on some beliefs. Now let's try and regulate the nervous system. Now let's see how the body goes. Now let's get them into that panic state, but allow them to get the words out, allow them to move their body, allow them to shake. And then we're teaching them over time that the panic is safe, that they can handle it, whilst we're also processing the memories, whilst we're also working with the subconscious. We're blending it all in together. So this is my personal opinion and my perspective, obviously, but I found that people heal when you work with all of those pillars, when you actually work with them energetically, when you work with their subconscious, somatically, you work with their body and their nervous system, and you're processing those memories at the same time. Like bringing it all in together is what actually allows people to move through things, and for you to be able to adapt as well. Because if someone came to me and I just worked with the subconscious and I was like, okay, all we need to do is fix your beliefs. Let's remove the belief that you're not safe, and let's remove the belief that this and that's not safe, and I hypnotize you to remove all of these things. You'll still wake up in a panic. Your mind might feel a little bit more calm, but your body is still going to be going through the panic because your body has its own memories, and because you have these memories there that haven't been processed, they're going to just continue to generate that feeling and those experiences until they're processed. So we have to be covering it from all angles, whether it's a small trauma, small T trauma, or a big trauma. We still need to be processing it down to I have people that come to me that are like, someone like the schoolyard example. Someone said that they didn't want to play with me at school, and it just ruined me because I felt like I had no friends that day and I felt rejected. And now I feel like that in all of my friendships, and I have social anxiety, and one thing like that can ripple into your life. And a lot of people have at least 10 of those sort of pivotal moments. So but like if you were to talk about that moment to somebody and cry and say like it really hurt my feelings and cry it out, it doesn't fix it. You still feel rejected. You still have social anxiety because you haven't processed the memory. You haven't talked to that younger version of yourself. You haven't actually healed anything. You've just talked about it. So my advice to people is always like find someone that can work with your body and like somatically can help you to express words, sounds, move your body, but also can regulate your nervous system, can work with your subconscious, and can actually close off and process those memories, because whilst they're still open, they're just going to keep poking. They're easily poked when they're open. Like they're not, I think of open memory as like a wound basically, that just sometimes the more it gets poked, the bigger it gets. Which it sounds visually that's like, oh, but once you close it off, your brain can know that that was then and this is now. Until you close it off, your brain doesn't actually know. And this is where, we were talking about how can people be present or in the moment realize that they're causing their own suffering. When that wound is poked, the part of your brain that actually manages time goes offline. So when you're triggered, your brain thinks that then is now. So that moment when someone rejects you, you think that you're that child in the schoolyard because your timekeeper goes offline. You're in that moment, not physically, obviously, but emotionally, spiritually, in every sense, you're back in that moment. And so your brain, you can't actually respond differently in the future until that's closed off and in the past. And then you can have that knowing of like, okay, this is like poked and a little bit of a response in me, but they're not rejecting me. And then you can lean in and have a different conversation. That's impossible if you've got this open wound that's pulling you back into the past.
So with that framework and referencing Western therapy, why is Western therapy often so ineffective for people?
It's funny you say that because this is what I've been getting a lot of hate about recently. But I think Western therapy I think it's good for people who need ways to cope with a situation. So for instance, if you are going through a divorce or loss of a parent, examples before, and you need to get through that stage in your life and it's a really hard stage, you don't have anyone to talk to about it, you need some ways to just kind of someone to talk to, someone to cry to, someone to experience that present moment experience and move through it. It's great because they help you to process it. They bounce like ideas off and they're giving you ways to kind of manage and cope with this situation. But when it comes to past experiences causing suffering in the present moment, there's no framework for it.
Well, it's built off the victim perpetrator model, which is you cause my pain, which is it validates people for their experience, but then they live off the pride and the label and the identity that's created from that. That's where like the DeMartini method is all about dissolving our perception of how one original experience was so one-sided.
Yes.
Which I'm sure you know about. But it's really hard for people to understand how such a traumatic experience can actually have positives to it. And then it's labeled as victim blaming.
Yes. Yeah, I have like a quite extreme example of like someone that had used the DeMartini method with me, which I can share.
Of course.
Yeah, to give reference to what you're saying. So I had a trauma where it was a really confusing day where my grandfather and my father, I had told my father that my grandfather had done something to me when I was younger, and they got together to punish me and to scare me into making sure that I wouldn't tell anybody else. My grandfather had already been in jail for child rape in the 60s, and obviously he was terrified of going back there. Didn't stop him from doing those things. But there was this moment, right? There was this moment where, and I was one of those people that had neck pain all the time. And I went into this session with this lady who worked very deeply with DeMartini and his methods and tapping. And so we went back into this moment, and it was a moment where my dad was standing on my neck and like holding me down so I couldn't like move, because he was like had his foot really intensely pushing down on my neck. And at the time, it felt like moments before that, I'd gone into this room, he'd told me like, don't worry, like nothing, like you're not going to die. Like I'm sorry, we have to do this. But he was kind of compassionate, and there was this confusion around he's compassionate, but now he's doing this awful thing. Like he's standing on my neck. And we did this, and I couldn't get my head around it, right? I was just like, he betrayed me. And it just felt like this awful thing. And we were tapping, and she said to me, how can we make this feel so that he was of service to you? And she said, and we tapped around, he was standing on my neck because I passed out. Like he was standing on my neck to help me pass out so that I didn't have to see what was going to happen. So we tapped through that. I feel like whenever I speak about it, that was a fresh one from like maybe a few months ago. You can see like my voice still like, but we tapped around that. But the way that I see that and feel that now is like, I think he actually did do that. And I got this like positive experience of like, that was the only way in that situation he could protect me. So what I gained from that was that he was actually protecting me, which to anyone else would be like, no, your dad's like, your dad's insane and he's whatever. And they would project, their opinions onto it. But for me, what I gained from that was that I didn't have to have that experience because of that. So instead of feeling these feelings of betrayal, I felt this feeling of like, in some way, he was there to protect me, which feels better, which we can start to shift. And that victim perpetrator, if that was the only model that I knew, and that was one tiny moment of what happened that day, and one tiny moment of all of the things that have happened throughout my life, like that, how would you move about the world? Like I spent years not trusting men and not trusting anybody, not thinking anything was safe. If I hadn't have gone through and actually done all of those I call them narrative flips, where we see what wasn't there to be seen, or we make up something that's not there. We make our own new narrative of it that feels better, because what's the point of having the painful narrative? So that was like an example where we kind of used that to change the way that we feel about it. And it's something that I'm still somatically working on. So we're talking about like, getting it out of my body. But that has shifted my mindset so much.
Because I think what people misperceive about the DeMartini method, it's not about invalidating the negative experience. It's about seeing another side, so that you can stabilize your perception. Because without a stable perception, that's where the subconscious belief will stem from. So when you, I guess, change the perception, changes the thoughts and the feelings that are generated. And I think what happens is life keeps giving us these exact same circumstances so that we can be forced to change the way we perceive this thing.
Absolutely.
And it's a hard, and I think that's what happens when people say there's so much discernment between like, how does someone, know what to take responsibility for? Because I think when someone says take responsibility, it's like they think they have to internalize the situation as being their fault.
Yeah, and there's a very big difference, because it's responsibility over how you relate to it now. It's not responsibility over what happened, that shitty thing. And, in certain modalities, and I will often get my clients to say, like, this was shit, and it was fucked up that this happened to me, and this shouldn't have happened to me, and it's not fair, but, and then we move on. But it happened and I can't change it. And what actually it gave me is the gift of strength and resilience. And it gave me this, a second chance at life, whatever it is, whatever wants to come in, you validate it, but you don't use it. You can validate it, but you can't use it. And that's something that I often use for myself. Like, I validate that was a shitty experience and I'm feeling shit, but I can't use that as, oh, well, this thing happened to me, so I'm allowed to be depressed for the rest of my life. Like, you can't use it. You can, it's true and it's real and it's shit, and you're validating it, but you're not using it as evidence to continue to suffer, or as a lot of people use it for, as an excuse for treating other people poorly, or as an excuse for not showing up, or as an excuse for not living life, or as an excuse for what their plethora of diagnosis.
Well, that's the thing, as the awareness of how much the subconscious mind and our experiences shape us. It's also now you're being used as the justification for anything in life now. It becomes the reason that we can unjustifiably hate on strangers because, oh no, this man did this to me, so I'm just going to be rude and inconsiderate because he has a negative agenda. And we start carrying all these assumptions into our life. So it is an interesting one because you almost can't trick yourself into believing. You have to go through the processing and actually do the work, because you can't trick yourself intellectually like I should be and like inject these moral injunctions like I should be nice towards men or I shouldn't hate my parents. But like if you haven't done the work, you can't trick yourself into it. It
leaks out. That's why people talk about shadow work, but like it leaks out unconsciously. You think that you've got a handle on it, but it shows. People can feel it. Like it does. It leaks out of people. So you do have to actually do the work.
What about this other type of trauma that you've been talking about with this quantum?
Oh yeah,
quantum stuff. I'm super fascinated.
Yeah, I've had a few clients and clients of the clinic. So I have people that I've trained, and they take on my clients now, so I don't see as many people one-on-one. And there's been this theme of people who have come through saying, I've had these flashbacks, but it's not my trauma. Like I know that it's not my trauma, and I don't have any point of reference for like where I am. I know that I've never been to that place. Like I'm having these flashbacks, but I don't understand. Like it feels like it's not mine. And my perspective of this, or what I was thinking about in the car, because my brain is similar to your brain, I think, listening to you speaking. My brain is like, but why and how and where does that come from? And
what a gift.
And I was thinking about, I'd be interested in what your human design is.
Yeah.
We can talk about that after.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was thinking about that, and I was thinking about like, when you go into quantum physics, like they talk about quantum entanglement, and if two particles have been one at one point and they've split, they can still feel each other, and they can still connect and communicate through the field. And so I was thinking about, well, if our ancestors, or like our grandparents, great grandparents, those parents, if they had these experiences that they never got to process because healing wasn't a thing, because they just never got there, and all of a sudden we start to do the healing work and we start to like open up, I want to say like a portal or something, but we open up this experience and we open ourselves up to that. Their DNA and their experiences are still connected to us. Like we could still, I believe, like hypothetically, I think through that quantum field and through that like genetic line, experience their experiences and help them to process it. Because when you go deep into quantum physics, it talks about time not being linear, and that all versions of you exist now, past, present, future, which would mean that their versions existed past, present and future. So their version from the past could exist now, and they could be like, hey, help me out, help me to heal this, and they're bringing it forward for us to process on behalf of that whole line. And I do believe that if we process that, it will heal that line. Like it will heal.
Oh yeah, this is the ancestral lines.
Ancestral and like generational. And I've experienced this like on a more not so woo-woo level with just last week, a client from the clinic said that her daughter had intense separation anxiety, like couldn't leave her, couldn't drop her at school, like really bad separation anxiety, and she couldn't understand why. And she came in and did 2 healing sessions. And on the second healing session, the therapist asked her, like, how's your daughter going? And she said, since our first session, I just realized she hasn't had any separation anxiety. Since I healed my separation anxiety from like my childhood wounds, it's completely disappeared from her. And so that's the power of like us doing the healing work for children and for future generations. But that affected, and you could argue that that's because the mum's nervous system was more regulated, and so the child felt safer in the mum's presence, and she felt the mum's safety, so she felt she could break away from her, because children often, if their parents are dysregulated, they think they have to be with them because something bad's happening, so they don't want to leave them. But also I think that it was so rapid and such a quick change that healing had affected her, because they're still connected at that quantum level, like they're connected. So like through
and children are so interconnected on this level,
and they don't have as much shit, so they can, like, it can help them so much quicker as well.
I think something that people struggle to comprehend when they're like dealing like overcoming their trauma, working through this stuff, is they feel like they're almost doing a disservice to their past selves, and they're not honoring themselves if they're not identified and with what's happened to them. They feel like they're forgiving the people who have done these things, which is part of that process, but they feel like, you know, they're disrespecting themselves. It's almost paradoxical. The way to move forward is to find the gift in the pain. And, you know, I think our ego sort of convinces us that we're minimizing ourselves. We're letting someone get away with doing terrible things to us. This quote I love from, is it Maya Angelou? Yeah. She said, "History, despite its wrenching pain, cannot be unlived, but if faced with courage, need not be lived again." I think that's the essence of the work is... Courage. Yeah. If you have the courage to do... Like, in that quote, it honors the pain that was in the past. And if you have the courage to process it, you don't have to replicate the thing. I think that sort of summarizes what we've been talking about here, where like there is a validation of the past, like we did go through hurt and we can honor that, but it cannot be unlived. So we can't, so if we spend our life running away from what happened to us, we're going to keep recreating it. But if we face that moment, those experiences with courage, then we don't need to repeat those same experiences again as well. Yeah,
definitely. I think my number one thing that I say to people all the time is like, this is for brave people. It's not easy. It's definitely about courage, and it is for people who are brave, because everyone else, like, because the easy option, which doesn't end up being so easy over time, but the easy option feels like numbing, avoiding, distracting, scrolling, drinking, working, anything to not have to face it. So yeah, definitely it is absolutely for brave people. And part of that has to be, as you sort of said at the beginning there, like it has to come back to identity work as well, because a lot of the time, you know, if one big traumatic thing happens, it can change your identity, but it's far less likely to change your identity versus constant ongoing small traumas over a period of time creates your identity, especially if it's in your formative years. So it's recreating literally who you are, and that's actually really painful, because you think that you have to be that way in order to survive. So there's a panic around changing the beliefs around who you are and changing who you are, changing how you show up, because literally an old version of you has to die for you to become this new version. Like, you can't be the person who suffered and the person who thrives.
So there's a grieving process of your former self.
And there is, and it's uncomfortable, because it's like, well, I've always believed that I'm not safe. If all of a sudden I believe that I'm safe, what if I'm actually not? What if actually something comes to me, and that you have to fully surrender and let that go and allow that panic to come up and out before you can fully land in, I am safe and protected now, or I'm a bad person, I'm a good person, whatever, whatever it is that you believed, you have to actually go through those like uncomfortable emotions and that grieving process to be able to come out the other side. And it really is about identity work. It's about creating a new version of yourself, because like you said, you can't change what happened, but you have full control over who you become.
What do you think about the differences in how men and women heal?
Oh, that's a tough one, because I've worked with a few men, and I worked with men for maybe a year, and I did find it a lot more difficult, like generally, for me to actually get them to uncover what was going on, what they were thinking, what they were feeling. There was, especially the men that I was working with, there was a big disconnect. So
disconnect with what? Between you or they themselves?
And a lot of the time they were sent there by somebody. They weren't there for themselves. They were like, their wives had booked them or their sisters had booked them because they had depression or anxiety, and they were like, oh, I don't really know why they booked the appointment for me. And so it's like, okay, well, how have you been feeling? And it's a really long, slow process with people who don't want to be there, full stop, which was a rule that I made. But I don't really find that there is much of a difference. I think that humans, in the way that humans suffer, is pretty similar.
Yeah. What about returning, like talking from a masculine and feminine energy perspective around healing, and like women doing the work to change the way that they connect with that energy?
I think that biologically, obviously, we're different. But masculine and feminine is something that I've really been thinking into a lot lately, and thinking about like who came up with masculine and feminine, and who decided that men were to be a certain way and that women were to be a certain way, and that, you know, yeah, I've been thinking about that a lot lately, because I've been thinking like, at the end of the day, when I have someone laying there in front of me in pain and they're suffering, the way that their brain connects the pain and the suffering and the way that they react to that is very similar. The way that they experience the world, we all feel the same feelings. We all feel the same panic, grief, pain, disgust, sadness, whatever. Like, we all feel the same feelings. And so, yes, there's an element, I do believe, of like that men kind of process things differently to women. So I feel like there are men that want to get more hands-on, or that want to actually need to like do things physically, and they respond better to like somatics. But I also have worked with men, and I know like my brother personally is very intellectual, and he's like a very like mind-driven person. So I just find that like they just it's I don't know.
Yeah, there's universal aspects.
Healing is universal for them, yeah. And even the masculine and feminine, like I've taught on that, and I've like learned a lot about that. But lately, I've been thinking and experiencing so many different types of people and spectrums in that I think, is that just something that someone has, you know, replicated throughout, and it's something that we're like really holding on to?
That's what I'm interested in. Like, is there a common pattern of the women that do a lot of this healing work and where they end up at? Is there a common pattern of like what that woman looks like without all the beliefs that society has put onto them?
Yeah, definitely. A lot of those women, once they get to a certain point, they want to rest. They want to be present. They want to be like, there's so many women that I work with who are high achievers, who close their businesses down, who don't want to, they actually realize they don't want to hustle and they don't want to escape anymore. They just want to be present with the people that they love. Like, they slow right down. That's
what I mean. Does that mean more tapping into their feminine energy?
Well,
That's
technically
what I mean.
that would be more feminine, but I don't know that the same thing doesn't happen with men as well. Like, I know that the more, like, I've done healing work on men who were running businesses who were miserable, and one guy sold his whole business.
But that's because he would be all masculine. That's because he would suppress all of his feminine, right?
Yeah, but then he sold his business so that he could just go traveling. He went traveling around Australia with his family so that he could be present with his family, and went back into that same like nurturing, connecting phase. So it's like, really at the end of the day, I feel like we say like masculine protects and feminine nurtures, but I think feminine can protect and masculine can nurture. And I think really feminine and masculine, if you break it down, the goal is connection. So they just want the same thing. They all just want love. They want to be loved. And we can be expressions of both. And like, obviously that's like yin and yang. We're supposed to, whoever came up with that one, you know, be masculine with a dot of feminine and feminine with a dot of masculine. But I find that people can sway in and out, and there might be men who want to be more feminine for a period of time and want to rest and connect with family and nurture and love. And there's stay-at-home dads now where mums are going to work, and I've seen actually dynamics where that works well. So it's kind of like changing my perception of just, we're humans and we want the same thing, which is love and connection.
No, it's interesting because I think
it's a hard one because that's really deeply ingrained too, feminine and masculine, especially in the industry. It's talked about and everywhere.
Yeah, I think in relationships, like when we talk about the magnetism, like polarity is something that magnetizes people, and that doesn't mean that men have to be the masculine or women have to be the feminine, for instance. But what I've witnessed is that I think men have that biological evolutionary drive to want to be more masculine and take up those roles. And I think the more they connect with that, that's the thing with someone, with the example you gave, they probably were full into their masculine, like 100%. They probably suppressed all of their feminine. So when they integrated some of these healthy feminine expressions into their life, like they probably started to find that balance. But usually there's probably that, like, think of a pendulum, right? If we've gone all one way or the other, we'll probably go back a little bit too far one way, and then we sort of find that integration in the middle.
Always, yeah. I talk about leaning into the opposite. So if you've been all masculine, you need to lean all the way feminine before you can find a healthy balance. It's leaning fully into the opposite. But like, and again, like, you know, he's gone traveling with his family. He could be, you know, the one that's like, that's driving and leading the maps and chopping the wood and like, do you know what I mean? Like still providing or protecting in certain ways. So
I know what you mean. There's been these like labels put on abstract behaviors, and it's like, especially when we're talking about energies, right? Like it is like a difficult concept to grasp and make tangible because we're putting these human-made words onto these frequencies. But
how do you define them without words? Which it's really
I know,
difficult.
that's what I mean.
Yeah.
But you can feel it. I'm sure can feel the difference between, like, think back to your own like lives and relationships. Like women are incredibly intuitive. Like they can feel when someone is in a certain type of, we're putting the human term on it of like masculine and feminine, but there is something energetically about how someone can show up like man or woman with their energy and how that influences a situation.
Yeah. It's hard though, because then, you know, you can meet men who feel feminine and you can meet women who feel masculine.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's
So
what I mean.
And they're in that side, but I guess it's such a difficult one, because when you feel that, are you attributing that to certain traits? Because we have this unconscious bias of like, oh, well, she kind of walks like this, or she shows up like this, or she has that certain job, so she's a bit more of a masculine person, or we're always identifying it with traits still. And like as a mum, I'm very protective, but I wouldn't say that that's my masculine side. That's just being a protective person, being a protective mum, or mums being protective of their children is normal, same as dads. Like a lot of the traits that if we had to put them into a list, like they could
overlap.
They could be argued both sides as being, you know, feminine and masculine. It's such a hard one. I think about it often, because I think like, how do you define it without labels, and how do you define it without that unconscious bias of like, I meet this person and energetically I can feel that they're in their feminine or their masculine, but is that energy, or am I reading like their clothing, their mannerisms, like, and attributing a man that, you know, maybe talks a bit more like this as being a more feminine man, but where did I learn that?
I know, if we have these unconscious biases to label, I can understand how we would attribute these behaviors to masculine or feminine. But what I've witnessed is, I just think men who do the work with their masculine energy, a lot of men have damaged relationships with their masculine energy because of what's been modeled to them through not only society but their fathers. And a lot of the men who do reconnect with their masculinity have significant improvements in their lives. I think by default, if we do the work in it from a human level, like I think we show up more, men show up more with masculinity and women show up more with feminine, with dots of the opposite.
Yeah.
But obviously we are injecting our own perception of what that energy is.
Yeah. And I think there is, like, you are right. Like, I think there's no woman who can, you know, embody all of the traits, we'll say, of a toxic or a healthy masculine and feel right and feel good in herself. Like, I think that there is this pull towards like creativity and flow and ease and slowness and nurturing. So yeah, I do think that you're probably right in that there is like a baseline of what feels for a masculine or a feminine, like masculine or feminine.
Well, men or women can, like, this is the whole thing, that's the argument that's been had in this conversation, is like men and women can sort of, you know, the social narrative is like anyone can be anything they want, which is like totally fine. Like we all have our choice. But a lot of the traditional movement of like returning to traditional values is that we thrive best when we're connected to our natural default energies. That doesn't mean that a woman who wants to be masculine, that's wrong. But it might not be optimal for her psychology, for her nervous system,
for her biology, for her
exactly.
menstrual cycles.
And
yeah,
that's the argument that's being put forward, and that's been validated by everyone's experiences. That's why I asked you about, like, is there a common pattern of women who do the work? Do they return naturally to a more feminine state?
Well, that's what I was saying. They ease, they slow down, they want to come into flow. They don't want to hustle and push.
That's exactly what I mean. And with the men,
we just went full circle. But yeah, that's
with the men, that's exactly what I see in the opposite. I think there's the man who's identified so much in his masculine because he's suppressed the parts of his feminine as well.
Yep.
And he also has injected the social narratives of he has to be tough and strong and put his head down and not sort of have this relationship with his emotions.
Yeah, which is that toxic masculine, not a healthy masculine.
Well, that's another conversation around. I don't like the word toxic masculinity, right? Because it's like once we start throwing the word toxic femininity, it's like the same concept we're talking about how these behaviors overlap and we're using human words. Now, men are starting to attribute, like young guys growing up, start to attribute masculinity with being toxic. But it's sort of ironic that, you know,
there's one a bad and a good.
Well, yeah, well, that's the whole point is if we say that masculinity is toxic, but then we're also saying they're universal.
Masculinity.
I don't see how they can both those arguments.
But I think that this is where I don't believe. I say that women can be in their toxic, in a toxic masculine or a healthy masculine. Like I think that even women can be in both. Like I don't think that it's men that's in both. Like I've seen women who are having traits of like the toxic masculine, quote unquote, but even when they heal, they're still in like a healthy masculine. Like they're still not feminine, but there is definitely traits that can get that can get unhealthy, we'll say, an unhealthy expression of masculinity. Like it can get really amplified, and then there can be a healthy expression of it, but it's maybe still not healthy for a woman and vice versa for a man. But again, like humans are so complex. It's so difficult to know where that line is and again, who decided this is the category of toxic masculine, this is the category of healthy masculine, and at what point does it tip over, and at what point is it good or bad for somebody, and what one person can handle in say like their stress load or versus what another person can handle is completely different, or what feels good for one person. And again, it's at the relevance to the time of their life, because being in masculine felt really good and protective for me and served me very well for a long time. So I needed to be there because I needed that level of masculine to go like, all right, I need to do this work. I need to dive in head first, blah, blah, blah. If I was in my feminine, I probably wouldn't have got to that point. So I needed that for a period of time. So it's not good or bad. Like it's like, it's the light and dark argument again as well. It's like you need both, and you need to move through them and use them when you want them and when you need them, and not like one or the other.
Yeah, by default, I think like masculinity and femininity like are good with their default state. That's why like when I say I don't like the term toxic masculinity, it also means I don't really like the term healthy masculinity. Like we don't need to keep attributing one as being good or bad, right? They're just sort of our human understanding of what these energies are. I think if we focus more on being good humans and doing the work, I think by default we will show up more with these positive behaviors. I do think though there is an emergence in people subscribing to more traditional values, but it is an interesting one because I think we have to acknowledge the biological differences we have. I think nature is undefeated.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that too. And I agree that, you know, women trying to fight for their right to, you know, work, and women trying to fight for their rights to have the same rights as men is not a bad thing. But I also think that off the back of that, we're trying to live in a man's world essentially, or trying to do things that men can do that biologically we're not necessarily designed to do. For instance, most advice that I took over my life around working out and health was from men, was written by men. As soon as I started reading books by women about nutrition and ovulation and your cycles and how to eat for a woman's body, I felt like a completely different person. I felt so much more in touch because we are biologically different. And so, but like when it comes to behaviors, because there's our biology, right? But then there's also these behaviors of like, you know, you say you don't want toxic, you don't like labeling things as like toxic or healthy or feminine or masculine, or not so much feminine, masculine, you're agreeing that they're there. But like if we say that like toxic masculine, one of the traits is like to being excessively controlling, like women can be.
Well, that's the shadow side of the
excessively
feminine.
Controlling, yeah. So, but it's like, it's a behavior coming from a wound that's like, that wants to be healed. But the way that lands, which is probably what you were asking in the beginning, the way that lands when you heal it. So we don't we don't need to put the behaviors into categories. We have these wounds, and when we heal this wound of being overly controlling, the man, has a healthy way that he shows up with his routines and his habits, and he feels whereas a woman lets go of that and she just goes, oh, whatever, you take control of everything. Like I feel free to flow now. Like the way that they land is different, but the behaviors is the same. So probably the traits don't need to be so in categories, but more so these are the pool of wounds. And when you heal these wounds, this is where you land.
Because I think there's two sort of camps there, and I think the discernment is hard because I think both camps don't have that level of integration to understand. I just feel like there is a social narrative that sort of anyone can be anything, and I think it goes against nature, and I don't think it works in practice, and I think people pay the side effect price with their health. But then again, I think these narratives are being pushed by the media. I think they like the divide. They don't like the masculine and the feminine, men, women connected. And I think that's why these narratives are pushed. That's why I think. But
I do agree with you. Like I agree that women thrive when they're in flow, when they are allowing the man to provide, when they're present, when they're, nurturing, when they're with their children. Like I see so many women that quit their high-paying jobs or close down their businesses and become mums, and they're at home spending quality time with their children, and they are loving that role, that traditional role, because they're designed to grow babies into their cycles. Their bodies are designed for that. So I do fully agree with that. Like I don't disagree with that at all.
Yeah, no, it doesn't matter if you disagree anyway. I think there is a lot of social commentary around it that makes people feel like, as well, like it comes back to women, because there's been such a movement for women to be empowered, that they almost feel like it's not good enough if they just want to be not a career oriented. I think women now are like almost getting shamed for like not I said this in the podcast yesterday. The role of a good mum is like the number one role in our society, and that hasn't really, it doesn't have. There's almost a sense that that's not enough now. They also have to have a business, and like I said, people are proving that is totally possible, and you can thrive doing that. But that doesn't mean it should take away from the significance of just having one role.
Absolutely. I went to an International Women's Day event last year, and they got guest speakers for this room, and the guest speakers were 5 women who ran big companies, talking about juggling it all and being women in business, and they were all talking about their success as women in business. And I turned to my friend and I said, there's not one mum up there. There's not one mum that's like, I raised beautiful children, and it's all. And I saw all of these women sitting there looking up to them and going, oh, so inspirational. Like I want to run a company like that, but it's really hard because I've got kids, and comparing themselves to these women. And it's like, it made them feel like it wasn't enough. And I talked to some people and they were like,
exactly my point.
Yeah. And I'm like the biggest hypocrite for that, because I run a business and have kids as well. And yeah, and it is hard. And there's a part of me that was, I started running businesses to make a point in the world, or to feel important, or, like there was a negative driving force behind that. It was like, I'm not going to let trauma beat me. I'm going to do something big. I'm going to do something powerful. And I got to a point where I was like, I've had many points where I'm like, fuck this. I'm going to sell this business. I just want to be a mum. I don't want to do this anymore. So healing does do that. And you are like, it's right. Like you come back to this like, oh, this is actually what matters, and this is what actually feels right. And it's finding a balance now. Like obviously I still am very passionate about helping people and healing. So it's finding a balance where they come first. And that's like a side project that kind of, if something comes up, they're always first. That's always first. I put my phone away when I pick them up from school, and I'm present with them, and I give them days off, and I take days off work, and we go on little adventures, and I make sure that I find that balance, because when I'm not doing that, I'm absolutely miserable. So yeah, I think we've made it seem like it's not enough, and every girl has to be a girl boss and an entrepreneur, and it's exactly what you said with leaning into the opposites. We were like, women have no rights, women have all the rights. women don't work at all and they're not allowed to work. Women are allowed to do whatever they want. And then we're going to find a middle where some women are like, that's what I choose. And some women are going to be like, no, this is enough. And I hope we find that middle ground where the pendulum swings.
That's what I feel like we're integrating. I think there's a freedom in our world to sort of choose whatever you want. But I think what we're seeing is that nature cannot be defeated. Like the biology, individuals thrive when they're connected with their natural essence, man or woman. So that doesn't mean that everyone has to be anything. But what I've seen firsthand experience is that when people are connected to who they actually are, man or woman, they thrive more in their lives. And I think a lot of the women who are very passionate about this, like women being empowered, they think that men are pushing this narrative to suppress their voice. But that's another theory. That's the theory that that's a left pushing this narrative that it's men trying to suppress women again. That's sort of a...
Yeah, but as a man, I have 2 boys too. So I'm always thinking about, having a similar mind to you. I'm always thinking, what world do I want to raise them in? And what kind of men do I want to raise them as? And who do they want to be? But where will they fit? And I've read parenting books that have such a variety of opinions on raising boys as a woman, and a woman isn't the best person to raise a man. And there's so much advice out there around men, when women step too much into their masculine. One book said that men feel like they're worthless, like they've got no point, they've got no purpose, because it takes that purpose away from them. And there's so many different perspectives and opinions that it can be really difficult for people to figure out where that line is. And yeah, I always just come back to love. It sounds so basic, but I just think if you love them the way that you know that they like to be loved, like I teach my kids about their love languages and what makes them feel loved and important. And I think that if you lead with that, they're gonna know where they need to go. But yeah, it's a hard way off field, but even genders and things like that. In grade 2, my son they had a class, a specialty class that came in that was was supposed to teach the kids about there's male, female, there's non-binary, you can identify to help teach kids about this. And that's grade 2 when their brains are still forming, which I think that for me, I was I don't really want my son to go to that class because I don't actually want him to get more confused about something that isn't confusing him yet. So that's what I mean, exactly. The narratives are being pushed onto these children, as you know from the studies of the brain, hypersuggestible. Their subconscious mind is wide open. Yeah. So they're at the stage now where, they need to be, and I have this conversation with my partner all the time and my ex-husband of their role in the house as men and their role, in the world, and how to create them into healthy masculine men. I know you don't like the word, but how to make them into men that are not it's hard to describe it even now at school. So for instance, in grade 2, or River now is in grade 3, Banjo's grade 1, but this year there's been multiple incidences where young boys at school have been putting their hand up girls' dresses, lifting girls' dresses up, touching girls, pushing girls, a lot of violence and things like that at school. And so there is there's got to be something going on at home, right? Where they're witnessing and they're treating women in a certain way. So definitely we've been thinking about how do we raise boys that respect women, because there's also this thing now where women are demanding respect, but their demands for respect are coming from a really aggressive place, which is not being received well. So we're trying to figure out how do we, not that my boys have ever done anything like that, but when they're surrounded by that and that's sort of happened through generations and it's coming out in the world, it's how do we raise boys into men who are that masculine that, yeah.
But because if men aren't connected to their masculinity, they'll seek it out in whatever behaviors, often negatively. I had someone on who talked about their journey with masculinity. When they were most destructive was when they were least connected or thinking about what their masculinity was. Because men have this, like I said, this default evolutionary drive to want to be in their masculine. So if they aren't doing it from from a healthier, grounded place where they're actually doing these positive behaviors, they're going to seek it out probably in unhealthy behaviors. And that's what we're talking about. But I think what happens is there's social narratives that are sort of suppressing what masculinity looks like for men. So what it's sort of doing is just pushing men to promote the unhealthy behaviors.
Yeah. And I think, like, again, if you raise them with love with good examples yourself, and you've done the healing work, I think that naturally you don't need to think about what traits or what you need to embody. It exactly. It happens, and they just turn into what they're meant to do, how they're meant to become. And that's kind of been my like take on it, because I read so many books and it was so confusing. Like, there was one by the guy who wrote Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, about parenting and about raising boys, and that was all very masculine, feminine, and there's a wealth of information out there around a subject that is difficult to navigate.
I think it's easier to model good behavior and show love and be love and do the thing and model that in our society than just talk about the best way to optimize. I think that's the best way to learn, is vicariously through healthy modeling. And I think that's where that's the curse of awareness, because we're so aware of how masculine and feminine energies, what that looks like in our world. So now we're trying to like optimize it, and it's sort of almost sometimes a distraction from just being a good human. I think the more embodied we are with our natural default state, we show up more healthy. And I think, sometimes we overemphasize one behavior and, one trait. I want to be healthy masculine, or I don't want to be toxic masculinity. And we're sort of like jarring sort of something that is a default expression of who we are. And I think the more we be rather than think.
I think it does start with good intentions. Like, it starts with a good guideline of like, if there is a list there and you can go, oh, okay, I identify with like 5 or 6 of those traits, I'm going to do some work to try and work on those parts, because maybe they're not aware. But I think you can do that without the labels of masculine and feminine. Like, you can look at yourself and go, I'm aggressive or controlling, or I'm needy, or I'm easily triggered, or I'm, whatever it is, whatever the traits are, and you can look at that and process that without having to label it as anything other than a wound that needs to be healed.
I think men or women, like one doing the work and going back through your experiences, and anyone who has the intention and the awareness will probably get a good chunk of change in their life.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. And I think kids is like a whole other layer, because when you're programmed to think this way of like, what belief does that create, and what if I do this action, it creates this result. And when your mind is like that, and then you have children, it's like, oh, could that thing that I just said to them create a belief that it can get really complex in that way too. So I feel like taking the masculine and feminine, everything out of it, and loving them is just like a pretty simple way to do it.
Yeah. Any concluding thoughts?
Oh, no, I feel like that was very intense, like ending to it. It's interesting. I've been thinking about that so
there you
much
go.
lately.
That's what happens. You think about it, you'll create it.
Yeah, create the situation. Yeah. No, I think we've had a really good chat, and yeah, it's good to. It's actually really fun talking with someone whose mind is very similar. A lot of the time I talk to people and they're like, what?
Yeah, that's something that's super interesting, is like how to change the messaging. Like, I guess what I've learnt now is I think what I've improved on the last couple of years is, obviously when I do a podcast, I don't filter myself. It's more just with the person. But when I talk to the average person, I can, like, with varying degrees of awareness and information, I know how to sort of change the way I speak to. Before, it was sort of this cookie cutter approach of my words and choices around how I converse, but now I feel like I can adapt a lot more.
Yeah, and it's for your own benefit too, I think, because I was the same, and I would talk to people and they would be like, oh, her like woo-woo mind stuff, and people wouldn't understand. And I think now you can read the audience very quickly, and if someone says, what do? You say, oh, I just work with the mind, or have therapy. Like, you can tell like how deep people want to go and where to have those conversations, and that not everyone's open to those conversations, and that's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, where can we go to see more of your work?
My website, jessicala.com.au, like everything is on there. Programs, the teaching that I do to teach people how to do work with those 4 pillars of healing that I was speaking about, and one-on-one work if they're like, okay, I need to give this thing a try.
Yeah.
It's all on there.
Awesome. Jess, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the episode. I hope you got a ton of value out of our guest today. Now, if you enjoyed that episode, don't forget to click the follow button on Spotify and also click the 3 dots and click rate show. Makes a massive difference in helping grow the show and bring on even bigger guests. And also, if you're on YouTube, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. It does make a massive difference. So thank you, and I'll see you in the next one.